I know it. That's why I elected not to do that. I didn't get a text
Did
from
you
her,
get a
but
song with her? She was asking you about Seth.
oh, she texted me.
She's texted somebody. She surely didn't text me to tell you. Maybe she could
Isn't
just
that
text you
funny?
directly.
No, I talked to Bill this morning,
What
so
did he
I'm
say?
leading singing for him this
Okay.
morning.
Okay.
But no, she didn't text me at all. She only texted you.
That's fine.
Mm. Oh, good. It's on now. Well, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you want to turn over in your Bibles to Job chapter 38, that's where we're going to be this morning. I just checked the temperature. Currently, right now, outside, it's 11 degrees, and it feels like -1. And the coldest I've ever been, I don't know what the coldest you've actually ever been in, not counting wind chill, is the coldest for me I've ever experienced is -8 degrees. -8. When I lived in Colorado during preaching school, we woke up and it was -8, and you always had to shovel the snow around the school to get ready for school. Still had school, with 8 inches of snow on the ground. That's just the way it is out there. But it hurt to breathe even. You breathe in that cold air and it just pierces the lungs. But I always think about that. When it gets down about this temperature, I always think about how cold I've been in. But some people, I was thinking about this, my kids probably have never really been in this cold of weather before. It doesn't get down this cold around here very often at all. But it's warm in here. I'm comfortable. I've got my coffee, so we're in good shape. So, well, let's go ahead and get started a little bit. I wanted to kind of introduce a little bit more about what we were talking about last week so that we can pick up. I know we had covered at least the first few verses of chapter 38. But I want to just kind of reintroduce it for us before we just jump right back into the text, just to remember where we are. Hold on just one second. I swallowed wrong on my coffee. Maybe I shouldn't do that. All right, so chapter 38 begins the words of God. Here Job is now facing this, what we call this spiritual crisis. He has already faced the physical crisis in the first few chapters of Job, and then the rest of the book has been this theological crisis that he's had between him and his friends. They keep telling him that the reason that he's having to suffer is because of sin in his life, something that he has done, and that's why you're suffering the way that you are. And it doesn't make sense to him theologically. It doesn't make any sense, because Job believes, just like his friends, that sure, God does punish people in real time for things that they've done, both good and bad. But this doesn't make any sense because I've not done anything bad. So that's a theological crisis. My view of God, that's what Job's thinking. My view of God is not matching up with what reality is right now. And so that's a theological crisis for him. What he doesn't realize, and what we realize, is that that's not the reason that Job is suffering. We see the bigger picture, that actually Satan is heavily involved in everything that's happened to him, and that God has allowed this to happen to him. And that God is using this opportunity to test Job and to really strengthen Job, show him how much he can endure at the end of this. Job becomes a better man by the end of it all. I think so. I think that we'll see that. So when we get to chapter 38 and God answers Job, then he has some things to tell him that maybe open his eyes, or at least remind him of what reality is and what true theology is. And so he begins to ask him a series of questions as he is facing God. Remember, at the very beginning of it, in verse 1, the Lord answered Job. And the other friends may be there, but the Lord answered Job. Job is the one who is the recipient of what God has to say. And he answers him out of this whirlwind. And we talked a little bit about this, that in my view, it's tornadic activity. It's something like that. Elihu had set the stage already about this upcoming storm that was coming, and he kept pointing to the skies, and now God shows up in that form, in a whirlwind. So that seems to fit, you know. So that's how God is going to answer Job. And he says this: "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" He says, "Gird up your loins like a man. Step up to the plate. I'll ask you some questions," and God's going to do that. He's got a series of questions to ask Job. "And you instruct me." And of course, he's saying this very sarcastically. "You tell me what you think about this. I'll ask you these questions, and you give me an answer. You instruct me." But Job doesn't have much of an answer for God, and rightfully so. There is not much of an answer for God. Every question that God asks of Job, it's a question like, "Where were you when this happened?" Or were you involved in this? And of course, Job, he's not, nowhere near that. So Job, even if he tried, doesn't have anything to instruct God about at all. So that statement, "I'll ask you and you instruct me," I take it as a sarcastic phrase for God to say to Job. He knows that Job's not going to have anything to answer for him. So then it's Job's ignorance in inanimate creation. And that's chapter 38, verse 1 through 38. And then the very end of chapter 38 begins the more animalistic part of creation, and how Job wasn't involved in any of that either. So he asked this first question: "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" Okay, that's the overall question. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Then he gives him examples. "Tell me if you have understanding." So tell me, let me know, who set its measurements? Who planned it all out? Who wrote the blueprints for the foundation of the earth? You know, for me, whenever I do some kind of a construction project, a lot of times I'll lay it all out on paper. I'll draw it out, the plan of what I want to build, how I'm going to build it, and what measurements it's going to take to be able to accomplish that. Now, sometimes I'll build something and it's just right here in my head. I can just start piecing things together and build something. But a lot of times I'm going to lay it all out. Matter of fact, when we built that chicken coop last summer, I took a picture of what the area was before, of the sheds together, and I took that picture, and then I started drawing over that picture how I wanted to build this chicken coop. I start laying out all of its measurements, making the blueprints to figure it all out. God says, where were you? Who set its measurements? Since you know. Who did this? Who laid out the blueprints for the earth? Who stretched a line on it? That's like popping a line, You take a chalk line and you pop it, and in construction to get a straight line. On what were its bases sunk? Who laid the footing? Who laid the foundation for the earth? Who laid its cornerstone? Who put the first stone down to make sure everything else was going to be square? Who did that? And then he says, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for glory. And if you remember last week, I mentioned how a lot of times in the Bible when it talks about the morning stars, and especially when it's coupled here with the sons of God shouted for joy, this is talking about angelic beings. So when the foundation of the earth was laid, God gives us a glimpse of what happened then, that the angels shout for joy. They sing at the creation of the earth. And so that kind of gives us a glimpse of that. We don't have that necessarily in the dialogue of the creation account, but I think it gives us a glimpse of what this is all about. So that's the question, first of all, is who did these things? Who laid the foundation? Of course, at this point, if that was all the questions that God asked Job, that would be sufficient. That's it. Because the answer is, for Job, if he was to actually answer God, he would have to say, I wasn't there. I didn't lay the foundation. I wasn't involved in it. I had nothing to do with the foundations being laid for the earth. And at that point, he would have to just be humble before God. But there's still more questions that God is going to ask Job. And so he asks him this: who established the sea waters? He gets a little bit more into the detail of creation. Who established the sea waters? He says this: or who enclosed the sea with doors? With bursting forth, it went out from the womb. When I made a cloud its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling band. And I placed boundaries on it, and set a bolt and doors. And I said, thus far you shall come, but no farther. And here shall your proud waves stop. And so, what a beautiful picture here of everything that God has created in this in the sea creatures. It's just amazing to me to think about. Who established, that's the overall question. Who established these sea waters? Do you know the boundaries of it? And, I think that this is definitely a reference to God's work on the second day of creation, as found in Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. When God divided the waters and He separated the land from the sea, as the Genesis account gives it to us. That's who did this. God did this. And Job wasn't anywhere around when God did it, and therefore had no idea when it was done. Nothing to do with it at all. And you think about these words. I want you to notice this. Notice and I tried to highlight this. Notice the terminology. Enclosed, doors, swaddling band, something to tie it up, to restrain it. Boundaries, bolt and doors, no farther, and then this word stop. Do you see the pattern there? It's all about control. It's all about control. Who controls the sea? Well, we know the answer. God controls the sea. God does. But that's the idea behind that. Notice that pattern that's there. I love that phraseology all throughout it. The enclosed, the doors. It's all about controlling. It's all securing it. God is the one who controls it. God is the one that secures the sea and handles every aspect of it. And if you've ever been out on the sea, maybe in rough waters, boy, it is intimidating. You know, I don't think I've ever been on the sea when I've been scared or anything like that. Not even remotely. I try to stay away from waters in storms, you know. But I've seen movies. I can understand that aspect of it. I don't know if anybody ever seen the movie The Perfect Storm. You know, I think George Clooney's in that one. I'm not sure. You know, that's a scary situation. I wouldn't want to be around that. God is in so much control of that, and I have zero control. Those sailors have zero control over it. And that's what God's point is with Job. Job, who did this? Who establishes the sea? Who created it? Who controls it? Who secures the sea? Well, again, we could stop right here, and obviously Job's answer is, not me. Not me. But God does not stop here with what he tells Job. He doesn't stop with just the sea. He goes on to talk a little bit more. And he says, have you ever commanded the morning? Have you ever commanded the morning? That's the phrase. That's the overall question that we find here in verses 12 through 15. The question is like, do you establish time and tell the sun to rise and start a new day? Do you do that? You know, this is a great question for God to ask. Job, have you ever made the morning come even once in all of your days? Any day of your life that you've ever made the morning happen? Is this the power that you have? Well, obviously, Job doesn't have that power. Let's look at the text. He says, have you ever in your life commanded the morning and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like clay under the sea, and they stand forth like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the uplifted arm is broken. I love this right here. You know, we all woke up this morning, and we enjoy those mornings. You know, you don't even have to be a morning person to appreciate the fact that you wake up the next day. You take in that breath and you realize that you didn't cause that to happen. You see the sunrise, and when you enjoy that sunrise and you see it coming up over mountains or over the river, and you see the light reflecting, you realize I have no control over that at all. You know, I saw someone on social media last week. You know, they were talking about that terrible car accident that happened in Texas as people were coming through, and you know the roads were bad, and this terrible car pileup, and you know people lost their lives over it. People are injured over this, and they kept reminding people, you know, in your job, you may think you're valuable in your job, but when you don't show up the next day because you're injured or you've been killed, they're going to be able to replace you in your job within 24, 48 hours. They're already looking, you know. It's not worth it to you to try to make it to this job that you may lose your life over, you know. Well, you think about that morning that comes, you get up the next day, and that morning that you have is yours, and you get to make the most of it. But you have no control over that morning or not. And when you're gone, when you're not living anymore, the next morning is still going to come unless the Lord has already come back. The next morning is still coming. You didn't have any control over it. You didn't cause it. Even when you're gone, when you're sick, you take a sick day, that next morning is still coming. It's still there. People will still go to work, people still go to school, people still live their lives because you didn't have any control over that morning. And Job doesn't either. Job lost everything in his life. He lost his family. He lost his friends even. I mean, I really feel like his friends, even that relationship is shaky at best. And then his wife certainly is not supporting him. But yet still, Job has to realize that God is the one that's in control of the morning, and he had nothing to do with it. Again, we look at this section and we think, well, how would Job answer this? And he has no control over the morning at all. He doesn't command it at all. All right, I've been talking a lot. Any questions or comments anybody wants to say about this? Okay, well, good. We'll keep going. All right, let's look at this next section. He asked Job, have you ever walked the deep sea? The deep sea, and I love this section right here. Have you ever entered the springs of the sea or gone deep sea diving and walked in the recesses of the deep? That's the kind of the question that I'm trying to maybe bring it into our own modern lives. Job probably didn't even know that there were springs of the sea, much less he had never entered them. Certainly not. That technology had not even been invented yet. For thousands of years, still not yet invented, be able to go into the springs of the sea. Yet he certainly did not know anything that was there. He didn't know any of the hidden things of the sea, such as the gates or the depth or the breadth of the earth. He doesn't understand that at all. So here's the text here. It says, have you ever entered the springs of the sea or walked the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? I love this right here. Have you ever seen the gates of deep darkness? And have you understand the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all of this. I love this aspect right here because, you know, what do they say? 75% of our earth is made out of water. Most of it is our seas, our oceans. You know, we think how vast and how amazingly large and overwhelming that our land can be. You know, if you've ever been out on the plains of Kansas and just looked for miles and miles and miles and been able to see so far, you think, wow, this land never ends. Or you've seen the great mountains or seen Pikes Peak or, any of the Rocky Mountains, and you think, wow, this is just absolutely gorgeous and it makes me feel so small. We watched the movie last night, The Sound of Music. The hills are alive with the sound of music. Oh. At the very opening, the kids kept saying, boy, this is the longest intro of a movie. And it is. It's a long intro. You don't see a character for like the first 5 minutes. And then, and all they're showing you at the very beginning of the movie are these scenes of the Alps. Beautiful, mountainous scenes of the hills and how alive they are. And then finally you see Maria, Julie Andrews, a small little figure walking through. And she begins to sing that song. Just a small little thing. We think how big and vast our earth is and how large these mountains are. And we realize how small we are. But the ocean is even bigger. The ocean is even more overwhelming. And we have not even really scratched the surface of what could be there. Scientists still have not even discovered everything that we can about our oceans. There's still so much more that's right there that we have no clue about, even with all the technology that we have today. We've barely scratched the surface of what the ocean is all about. And the ocean is so vast and so large. God says to him, have you ever walked the recesses of the deep and seen the springs of water that come out of the sea and how it fills the ocean? No, Job has never been there. He's never walked that. He says that, have the gates of death been revealed to you? The ocean, even to this day, is a deathly place. It could mean your life. And of course, in Job's time, the sea is a place of overwhelmingly intimidation. And so this is where people go and they die out there on the sea. Have you ever seen the gates of the deep darkness? And when I read that, I think about those fish that glow down in the deep ocean and how dark it is down there and how God has created them to be able to provide light. Isn't that interesting how God has done that? Scientists will tell us that evolution has caused it because they've adapted to being so dark. How would they know what light is and that they needed it if they've never seen it? It doesn't make any sense. What fish is the first one that says, if I would just create some kind of a light beacon, then we would be able to see a lot better? And what fish decided that? It doesn't make any sense. God is the one that said, I'm going to create this fish that's going to live down here in this darkness, but I'm going to provide light for it. God did that in the deep darkness. Have you ever understood the expanse of the earth? And he says, tell me if you know this. And I just picture God stepping back and say, okay, Job, tell me. I've revealed all these things to you. Now tell me. Tell me if you know these things. Well, he doesn't. He doesn't know these things. Job has no answer whatsoever. Any questions or comments? I want to welcome that anytime. You got anything to say? Oh, he says, you shall answer me. In the King James? New King James. You shall answer me. Yeah. Yeah, like, he's waiting. You shall do that. It's a command kind of thing. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so then I love this question here. How do you handle light, darkness, and weather? And this is all coupled together in these few verses. There's quite a few here we're going to look at. He addresses several different aspects of it, but I coupled all this into a whole bunch of questions. How do you handle light and darkness? So let's look at the verses 19 through 21 first. Actually, let me go back. I just want to make sure I'm hitting a couple of things I made notes of real quickly. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love this. Here in this text, we'll see that light and darkness are personified and associated with being mysterious beings whose place is beyond man's reach. Okay, so these are, light and darkness, he treats them as if they are a character, as they're a person. And as if they need help to guide them to find their way home. And God can do this, but Job certainly cannot at all. He doesn't know these things. Why? Because he wasn't born yet. And the number of his day, he has numbers to his days. Job was so old and so wise that surely he did indeed know these things, but no, surely he doesn't. If this were the case, God invited Job to speak up at any time. All right, I guess we'll get to the text here in just a second. I've just got a couple of things. He asked him, have you ever seen the treasury of hail? Like hail, when a storm comes through. Which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war. And that's a great point to make. God is going to talk about this hail, and there's a difference. I didn't realize this till I was maybe a little bit older, probably because we don't see a lot of winter weather in Arkansas, but there's a difference between hail and sleet. Sleet is a winter storm, when water freezes and it falls to the ground. But in a storm that can happen in the middle of the summer, we can still get ice on the ground. Why is that the case? Well, I love this aspect of it. God is so powerful. Water is, maybe it's cold. It's colder up there in the atmosphere. I'm going to do a Buckner here for you. It's colder up here in the atmosphere, and as the water falls, it freezes. But the storm is so powerful that it takes that freezing rain rain and it brings it back up into the atmosphere and it refreezes that water. And it gets bigger and then it comes back down again. And the stronger the storm, the bigger the hail. Okay? So it circulates until the hail is so big that it can't come back up into the atmosphere to refreeze and it falls down on the earth. So there's a big difference between hail and sleet. Hail is danger. That's a storm that's a strong storm, whereas sleet is not. So the point to that is this. When it talks about hail, it's talking about this strong judgment of God. On very many occasions in the Bible, God uses hail as bombs and missiles from heaven against those who are hostile to him or to his people. He frequently uses hail as a judgment against his enemies. I immediately think, because we've been reading the book of Exodus, I immediately think about the plagues and how God used hail as judgment upon the Egyptians. The Canaanites in Joshua chapter 10 and verse 11. An apostate Israel deals with hail in Isaiah 28. Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38. And then wicked Rome in Revelation 16 and 20 and 21. The hail there. Again, all about judgment upon people who are against God. And so when God says, have you seen this treasury of hail? Have you seen my artillery back here, which I have reserved in a time of trouble, a time of judgment, a time of battle and of war? Well, Job has not seen that at all. Then the question is, who has divided a channel for the overflowing water? In the previous section, we saw where God spoke of his wisdom in managing the snow and the hail and managing the sea. And here he speaks of his ability to engineer the draining systems and the channel for the overflowing of water. God is the one who designed how the Mississippi River flows into the Gulf of Mexico. God is the one that has designed how the rivers flow. God's the one that has done that. And then he asked this question, has the rain a father, or who has begotten drops of dew? Who's the person who is the originator of this kind of weather? In Job 36, Elihu used the water cycle as this storm is approaching as an example of God's greatness. And rightfully so, it is. And here God took credit for knowing how these things are designed, how they are maintained. And he asked Job if he had any similar knowledge at all about this weather pattern. So again, look at this text. We'll read through it real quick and you'll see these points that I've made. And then I want you to notice this pattern again. I love these patterns that we can find. He says, where is the way to the dwelling of light and darkness? Where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, that you may discern the paths to its home. For you were born then, and the number of your days is great. So, first of all, we've already talked about this. So, you see that point that he's making about how light and darkness are personified as if they need a way home. They don't know how to get home, and God is the one that directs them to be able to get to their place where they belong. God puts the light where it belongs, and he puts the darkness where it belongs. And Job has nothing to do with that. And he says sarcastically again, because you were born then, right? Oh, I'm sorry, Job. You're old enough, you're wise enough, you know how to put the light where it belongs and the darkness where it belongs. But the pattern that I noticed, and I forgot one of the personal pronouns, you can see here he says that you may take it, that you may discern. And then here again, I forgot to highlight that one. For you were born, and the number of your days. So just notice that. I love the patterns that we can find in Scripture. Notice how I just feel like God is even maybe pointing his finger at Job. You can take it to its territory. You may discern its paths. You were born then, and your days are great. You're an old man. You know these things. Surely you do. All right, let's keep reading here. Verse 22 through 24. Again, the pattern continues. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail? Which I have reserved. Here's our point that we're making about how hail is part of the artillery of God. He says, which I have reserved for the time of distress, for the day of war and battle. Where is the way that the light is divided, or the east wind scattered on the earth? And again, our pattern is here where he says, have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Are you in control of how much snow? Boy, I'm telling you, I've seen everything from 2 to 3 inches to 4 to 8 inches that we're going to get in the next few days. Does anybody really know? No, we don't. Who does know? I'm asking you, who knows? You know it? God knows. God knows. Why? Because He has the storehouses. He's already got it all lined out how much snow we're going to get here in Batesville. And it might be different than what they get in Newport. It might be different than what they get in Jonesboro or wherever else. But God has it all lined out. He has it all counted out exactly down to the inch, even smaller, down to the millimeter of how much snow is going to come. He's in control of it. Job, he's never seen the storehouses of the snow or the storehouses of the hail. All right, let's keep reading here. Verses 25 through 30. He says, who has cleft a channel for the flood, or a way for the thunderbolt to bring rain on a land without people, on a desert without a man in it, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the seeds of grass to sprout? Has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? For whose womb has come the ice, and the frost of heaven, who has given it birth? Water becomes hard like stone, and the surface of the deep is imprisoned. So again here, we see how God is in control of every aspect of the weather. And I didn't make mention of this, but I love this right here. He says, to bring rain on the land without people. And here it is again. You know, that's the way Hebrew parallelism works. It repeats the same thing, but in different words to bring emphasis upon it. He says, on a desert without a man in it. Very much like what he's already said, to bring rain on on a land without people. And, you know, it goes back to that old phrase that people say, if a tree falls in a forest, what is it? Does it make any noise? You know? Well, according to this, even if no one is out there in the desert, no one is out there, the rain still comes. The rain still comes. Why? Why would God provide rain to something where there's no man in it? Well, I think because God's in control of His creation and He's created it to be that way. And, you know, I think about in human history when there was no one that inhabited the lands of Montana. I don't know. Well, God still provided rain to Montana even when no one was there. God still provides rain to all kinds of places. And weather patterns are all over the earth no matter what, no matter who's there. God's in control of it. He's the father of it. So he asked that question, has the rain a father? And notice the pattern again. I try to highlight these patterns here for us. Father, and then another word, begot, and then even more detail here, from whose womb has come the ice, and then again, and the frost of heaven, who has given it birth. So you can see the pattern here of who is the originator, the father, who is begotten, from whose womb, who are the parents of ice, and the frost of heaven, who are those parents? Well, it's God. God is the one who is the originator of all of that, not Job. Job has no control of that at all. I love this section so much because it just gives us a beautiful view of what creation is all about. All right, now, verses 31 through 33. Yes, do you know anything about the stars? Do you know anything about the stars? I went too fast. Hold on. Anything about the stars? All right, so he'll ask a question. Can you bind the chains of Pleiades? God did not merely challenge Job on his lack of knowledge. he also exposed Job's lack of might and of greatness in comparison to God. Obviously, Job was not able to manage or master or change any of the stars or the constellations in the sky. Yet God is the one who is in control over every aspect of it. He's the one who created them, and He set them in their place. And Job has nothing to do with it again. And with these high and almost outrageous examples that God provides, it's pointing out what Job did not know. And we should remember that God's purpose here is not to humiliate Job. He has no reason to do that. Instead, God seems almost playful here in making the point that He is omniscient and that man is not. I think it's playful. It's that sarcasm. Sarcasm can be funny. It can be playful. We do that in our family, don't we? We live on sarcasm in our family. And it's playful and it's fun. I almost see that part of God's personality right here, where He's been sarcastic with him and playful with him about all of this. He asks, can you bring out Mazzaroth, which is a constellation in its season, and guide the bear with her satellites? And this is generally understood to mean the signs of like the zodiac. That's what a lot of people understand that to be. Whatever they are, the point is clear. They are bound by God, who leads them around the sky as He pleases, a thing that man cannot do at all. No control whatsoever about it. All the signs of the zodiac, and that's man-made. It's not anything that God has done at all. The signs of the zodiac are all based upon those constellations. So that's why this has been translated that way. I don't like the translation of it. I'd rather it just say constellations, because that, to me, that they've taken, when they translate it Mazzaroth, they've taken it to mean something that I think that it is not. In the context, he's talking about stars, he's talking about constellations. That's what it has to be about. Yes, ma'am. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Yes, that's what I think. I think in my, let's see, that's what verse is that? 31. Let's see here. Yeah. My translation is the New American Standard, and it translates in verse 32 instead of Mazzaroth constellations. And I think that's a better translation of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Since I don't know Hebrew well enough to know exactly what those words are or anything like that, but all the research that I led up to, it's talking about these stars, the constellations. That's a better translation of it all anyway. Yet these are names that we use even today to identify the constellations, but I have no problem with that at all. Whatever the case is, he's certainly talking about heavenly bodies up in the sky, and with that in mind, the point is, who's in control of those things? Well, God is, and that's the point that he's making to Job. So do you know anything about the stars at all? And I love this too, because obviously Job didn't know anything. Job didn't even have a telescope. You know what I'm saying? He didn't even have a telescope to look up at the stars and understand exactly what those were. He had no real concept of it. All right, let's keep reading here. In our text, it says, can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth a constellation in its season and guide the bear with her satellites? Or do you know the ordinances of the heavens or fix the rule over the earth? Now I want you to notice the pattern here in this text. Notice this. So it gives this word bind, it gives this word loose, lead, guide, ordinances, and rule. Again, all about control, all about the way that God puts it in order. Okay? So the binding and the loosing and the leading, the guiding, the ordinances. I think about the law. Do you know the laws of heavens or fix rule over the earth? And so that's a good pattern that we find here in this text too. Who's in control of it? Who binds it? Who looses it? Who handles every aspect of the stars? Well, God's point here to Job is, it's me. I do this. All right, this last section here, we've got just a few minutes here to go over. Can you command the weather? Now, he's already introduced this idea, but he gets a little bit more in detail here, verses 34 through 38. Make sure. I feel like I'm going a little bit ahead here. Fine. There we go. He says, can you lift up your voice to the clouds? Job was not powerless over the starry sky and constellation, but he was not only powerless over those stars, but he was also powerless over clouds and of lightnings. And I love this aspect right here. Of all the natural phenomenon that can happen, both far and wide and powerful, Job has no power over it at all. Who has put wisdom in the mind, or who has given understanding to the heart? A phrase that we'll see. Job knew that man had intelligence and wisdom, and that this intelligence must have been given by an intelligent designer, God. Like all men, Job's intellectual capacity was not the product of random chances or mysterious processes. We know the things that we know not because we evolved from it. We know the things that we know because God designed us to know these things. And we can learn these things. So let's look at the text real quick and see this pattern. And then we'll stop here. And then next week I want to go over the animalistic part of God's creation. And we're going to finish the book next week, the text part of it. And then the last class will be all application. And I'm so looking forward to that one. It is going to be so good. And maybe it won't be 11 degrees that morning. So verses 34 through 38, it says, can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that an abundance of water will cover you? Can you send forth lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the innermost being? Who's put it there? Why are you smart? Or given understanding to the mind? Who can count the clouds by wisdom, or tip the water jars of the heavens when the dust hardens into mass and the clods stick together? Again, I want to show you these patterns that are here. Again, you can see these personal pronouns. Can you do this? So that an abundance of water will cover you. And then can you send forth lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are. And then again, notice this pattern. So that's one pattern with the personal pronouns there of you. And then this pattern here. Wisdom, innermost, understanding, mind, and then wisdom again. A good pattern for us to notice in the text. Who's in control of all this? Who has made man as smart as we are? God has. God has. He gives us the wisdom that we need. He gives us the ability to learn and to be wise with understanding of what's going on in our minds. All right, we'll stop right there because verse 39, it begins the animalistic part of creation, and then we'll finish the book next week. And then the application. Thank you so much. Hold on just one second.